I am Mary Sketch with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, and I am for the soil to protect the landscapes, waterways, and resources that provide the food that we all eat and the lands that we recreate on for current and future generations.
We certainly hope this finds you and your family doing well during this holiday season. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Ishii, and welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. And we will be getting to our podcast in just a moment, but I wanted to remind everyone of a new section on our website. That's forthesoil.org, and that new section is called Soil Health Champions. And there you will find a series of videos about people right here in our region who are doing everything they can to improve their soil health. Some very interesting farms, very interesting gardens, very interesting situations, and of course, very interesting people. That series of videos is found at our website, forthesoil.org, and there at the menu bar across the top of the page, just click on Soil Health Champions. Well, let's now join our podcast. This is part 2 of our conversation with Jon Stika. He is the author of a book entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining us, of course, are Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension and Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Hard to believe the end of the calendar year is upon us. The next podcast will be published the first week of 2023, so time moves on. Today's podcast is part 2 of our conversation with Jon Stika. He is the author of a book entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. And I'd love to have the first question. I'm just going to jump right in there and continue our conversation. By the way, if you haven't heard that one, go back to our podcast page at forthesoil.org, and there you'll find the podcast published for December the 6th. That was part 1 of our conversation with Jon. And Jon, I'd love to ask you about the integration of livestock on healthy soils. Here in the area where I live, and Eric also lives in the Shenandoah Valley, very intensive with animal agriculture, poultry production, beef cattle production, dairy cows, sheep, lambs, goats, a lot of animals on the land. Give me your thoughts about the integration of livestock when it comes to healthy soils.
I get into discussions with people about whether livestock should be considered a principle or a tool, or I look at them as a tool. And if there's a way that I can stimulate plants properly by grazing with livestock, then they're an excellent tool. Grazing management that just takes the tops of those plants and stimulates them to release sugars down into the soil through their root system to feed the soil organisms, and then move those livestock on so those plants can recover, keeps the plants healthy, keeps them stimulated, keeps the soil fed. So livestock are an excellent way to do that, where you don't have to burn any diesel fuel. You don't have to, rely on machinery to do that. So yes, whether it's in a cropping system, in a purely grazing system of perennials, they could be an excellent tool.
Jon, and this may not still be the case, but I was digging around and saw that you also are I think they called it a brewery science consultant. Is that true?
Yes.
Would be interested in just the intersections between that and soil health, because it's growing grains at the end of the day.
Well, brewing, and there's a brewery here in Dickinson, North Dakota, that started up in 2019. It's called Fat Fish Brewing. and it's spelled PHAT, by the way. But so they approached me because I've been home brewing for 30 years. They approached me to be their brewer, so I was foolish enough to say yes. But so I ran that brewery for the last 3 years or so, and I just recently handed it off to a young lady who was working with me as a apprentice, so to speak. So now she's the head brewer. Jade Sheffield is her name. But the intersection between soil health and brewing is not only in growing the grains, which we buy our malt from a maltster in Bismarck here in North Dakota that sources they grow their own barley themselves, their family, but then they also source it from other neighbors that grow for them. And all of that is regenerative ag. That's all no-till, diverse rotations, etc. The other intersection there is brewing is a biological system. The old German saying, and I don't remember how to say it in German, but that brewers make wort, which is the sugar solution that you make from malted barley. Brewers make wort, but yeast make beer. So if you don't keep that biology happy, you're not going to have very good beer. If you don't keep the biology in the soil happy, your soil's not going to function very well. So those two things are very, the parallels there are very interesting.
And John, this might be a little bit of an aside, but thinking about like farmers having more control over the decisions that they make, either at a local or regional level, do you see opportunities there for farmers to take more control, and specifically with this focus on soil health?
Well, by starting to restore their soil function, they can reduce their input costs easily in half, easily. So, you do the math. What's that? What are your input costs for fertilizer and fuel and labor and all these other things? You can easily cut those in half in the first 3 to 5 years. Beyond that, we have a study. I also work part-time at the research center here, the NDSU Research Center, and we have one study that is a very diverse crop rotation with cover crops and grazing with livestock. So we harvest some of the crops mechanically and some of them with livestock. The protocol for that study was to soil test and then apply fertilizer based on the soil test recommendation, just like most studies. About 5 years into that study, the soil tests were coming back. You don't need any nitrogen. You don't need to apply any nitrogen. So we haven't. So we haven't been applying nitrogen on that study for the last, I think it's 5 or 6 years. And we're still getting the same yields, the same, economic yields, expected yields that we had before. So you don't need fertilizer at all. The degree that you need fertilizer informs you on how well your soil is functioning. If your soil is not functioning very well and you have a fertilizer skip in your field and you have a very poor crop there or no crop, your soil is not functioning very well. That soil should be able to feed that crop without any supplemental fertilizer. And typically, the more fertilizer you add, the more it disturbs the biology in the soil. So it's one of those things you have to get yourself away from that.
Once again, we're talking with Jon Stika. He is the author of a book entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. And John, final question from me, and it regards a practice we see here in the mid-Atlantic region of Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Very concentrated dairy industries, also poultry industries. And one of the traditional ways to amend the soil is the spreading of poultry litter or dairy slurry on top of the soil. But one of the things that's starting to catch on specifically in Maryland, southeastern Pennsylvania, and portions of Virginia is the injection of manure into the soil. And the way it's been explained to me is this: number one, it puts the nutrients right into the root zone where they need to be. And number two, it prevents the manures from being applied to the surface of the soil, preventing potential runoff and also god awful smells. You know? So, what is your experience with manure injection? Do you see that as a technique that would, number one, improve soil health, and number two, be more environmentally sensitive?
We have a few hog operations here in North Dakota, in this end of North Dakota, that have confinement systems, lagoon systems. And so they hire a contractor that has an injecting setup that with a drag hose, where they can just pump and push it through a hose that they pull behind this piece of equipment. And that's the only disturbance as far as anything that you would describe as tillage. That's the only disturbance that happens on those fields. All the rest of that production system is no tillage, a disc opener drill that's, very, very minimal disturbance. So as long as we can keep the disturbance to a very minimum, I think it's better to put it in the soil rather than leave it lay on top. Because even if you have pretty healthy soil, if you get a hard rain, especially if you don't have a lot of residue on the surface at that time, that manure could leave the field. But nutrient wise, if you can get it injected in the soil, there's especially nitrogen is a lot more volatile, that you'll lose more of that just into the atmosphere rather than it running off. So it's more economical as far as capturing all those nutrients to inject them rather than leave them lay on the surface.
And my last question, Jon, is any, I guess who your mentors are or some of your favorite resources. I know your book is a favorite resource for so many, but where you continue your learning.
There's a lot of soil biologists that I've interacted. Dr. Chris Nichols is one of them. Jill Clapperton, Elaine Ingham. And it's interesting that every one of them is a woman, but that's where my learning needs to continue, is to understand more about how plants and soil biology interact and how the soil biology maintains soil aggregates and cycles nutrients and feeds the plants. So yeah, most of my mentors are soil microbiologists.
Jon, my last question, I know you're also an avid gardener, and I know Jeff is, and we have a small garden, and I think Mary started trying to start one in the Richmond area. If you'd have recommendations for gardeners who are also interested in soil health.
The principles are still the same. I plant everything I take a shovel and put it on edge, so it's more like a knife, and I just use it to make a little slice in the soil, only as deep as I need to place my seed. So if I'm planting corn, I got to make a little deeper slice. If I'm planting broccoli or lettuce, I don't have to make very much of a slice at all. I place that seed by hand and cover it up by hand, and I'm done. I'm planted, and then I mulch as much as I can. I pull the weeds, I don't hoe them. So I'm doing all these things to minimize soil disturbance and keep the soil covered. So I'll use whatever I can get my hands on for mulch. If it's an old bale of hay that a farmer discarded, that busted or whatever in the ditch or something like that, I can be kind of a scavenger, but I'll say, hey, you're going to come back and get that bale? And no, it's all busted up. I'm not going to bother with it. You can have it. So I'll pitch it into the back of my pickup and bring it home. But grass clippings, whatever you have access to. And here not too long ago, I actually dug down in the soil, dug a cubic foot of soil out to see how many earthworms were there, and it was about 75 at that point in time. And when I water my garden, the water never sits on the soil surface. If I overwater, the earthworms will start coming up for air, because the water just keeps moving down, and it fills all their channels with water, and they start coming to the surface. Then I know it's time to quit watering.
That sounds like healthy soil to me. And Jon, I want to give you one final opportunity to plug your book. It's entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. And I want to tell farmers, you can read this book in probably a couple of days. It's not like a 3-inch college textbook. It's, I believe, 75 pages in length, and very interesting information for farmers, gardeners, anyone interested in soil health. And Jon, tell us again where it's available.
You can get it on Amazon. You can find it there. And like I said, the principles apply no matter what your operation is. And I tried to write the book so it was very approachable, whether you're a farmer or a gardener, it doesn't matter, to make the information very approachable. And like you said, it's a very short book. It's less than 100 pages. It's easy to read. And I think that's the niche that it's found, is in introducing people to soil health, getting them to understand, how did we get here? How do we fix this? What are the principles?
Well, it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast again today. Jon Stika, author of the book entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. Pleasure to have you with us. And Mary and Eric, pleasure having y'all.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jon.
And now we hear from Dr. Rory McGuire at Virginia Tech with one of the 4 core principles of soil health.
Maximize living roots is the modern term for cover crops. So instead of just growing, for example, corn during the summer, and then you leave the land fallow over the winter time. Over the winter time, you would plant a cover crop, something like rye or clover, barley, something that'll grow during the winter time. Initially, people were thinking of cover crops. It was pushed as a way to stop nitrogen leaching, because if there's something growing there, it's going to capture the nitrogen, prevent it leaching, and improve water quality. And that's why it was cost shared by the regulatory agencies. But now we're realizing that not just is it capturing nitrogen and stopping going into the water, that nitrogen can actually be available to fall crops the next summer. And while that plant's growing, it's adding organic matter to the soil, which is really great for soil health. If you have more organic matter, you're going to capture more water. When it rains, the soil can hold more water, and it can also provide more nitrogen during the growing season.
For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.